your mind.
Good evening, and welcome to Cult Free Radio. I'm your host, Mad Sweeney, and it's my birthday. I am 48 years old, believe it or not, and 12/12 is indeed my birthday, no joke. So this is the It's My Birthday edition of Cult Free Radio, and I have no guest tonight. It's all Mad Sweeney all the time. Uh, the topic, even though I know I said when I brought the show back from hiatus that it's not going to be a topical show, it's going to be an interview-based show, this topic is kind of important, and it's my birthday. So, what's going to happen is I'm going to talk about the Australian Royal Commission uh, document submissions that were done over a month ago now in November. I've had some time to read over the document. 30 pages, something like that. And the Watchtower's response as well was about 10 pages submission. So I read through them both. Um, I mostly tonight would like to discuss the submission of the Senior Counsel assisting the Royal Commission, which is basically, if you watched any of the hearings or read any of the transcripts, that is the attorney Angus Stewart and his staff, obviously, who put together this document to submit to the Commission after the hearings. The Watchtower response, there's no telling who from the Watchtower actually wrote that up, but it's very typical Watchtower speak. I am tonight going to be doing something I've not done before, which is show the document on the screen as I'm talking about it and scroll down as I talk about each section so that people can read along and know what sections I'm talking about while I'm talking about them. It adds one more level of degree of difficulty to running this show and this software. It's not that complicated, but if you're a regular listener, you know that I manage to screw something up pretty much every show. So if something happens, don't worry, I'll be back. If I cut off my own audio or the picture's not showing, I'll fix everything before it gets onto YouTube, like I usually do. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Well, one little bit more of further ado. It is a lengthy document. I'm probably not going to cover the whole thing and also the whole Watchtower response in this one show. This is probably going to be a multi-show effort, and I may just pre-record the other portions because I also believe this will be the last live show of 2015. There will be no January show, at least not on the second Saturday of January. So after this, I'll do some pre-recorded cult-free radios for a while, and then maybe get back to some live stuff again in the spring. So, the Australian Royal Commission. should be appearing on your screen. This is the introduction page of the submissions of the Senior Counsel assisting the Commission, and it basically begins by introducing and explaining what the Commission was all about. And I think it's important that I probably should read this. A lot of listeners know what it's all about, but some might not. So what happened was, last summer, from July 27th to August 5th, and then again on the 14th of August, there were public hearings. As you can see in point 1, that it says it's the 29th public hearing of the Royal Commission. The Commission in general was established to examine the responses of institutions and organizations to child sexual abuse in their organizations. And there are, if I recall, 30-something, maybe 40-something different organizations, schools, camps, churches, whatever, across Australia that are being examined, investigated. And it started actually way before the hearings, when the Commission was established and called for people to submit their stories. Where to follow up. And the 29th group is the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower Society of Australia. And so they were being examined as to their responses. Like it says here, as you can see in point number 2, the scope and the purpose of the hearing was to inquire into the experience of survivors of child sexual abuse within the Church of the Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia, the responses of the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society to allegations, reports, or complaints of child sexual abuse, the systems, policies, and practices and procedures that are in place in Jehovah's Witnesses to respond to and deal with these allegations, also the procedures that the religion has in place to prevent child abuse. And so basically it's covering the whole child sexual abuse allegations, how they're figured out what's what when a complaint comes in, and how the religion deals with prevention and dealing with the guilty party as well. So the Royal Commission, it basically got input, written input, from survivors who had experienced child sexual abuse. And the Commission invited 2, as I guess, representatives of the type of thing that happens within the organization. And they were given the initials to protect their confidentiality. BCB is one and BCG is the other. And their experiences were during the 1980s, and they testified as adults, obviously, this year. Also, the Watchtower allowed 8 elders who were involved in these cases to testify, 3 people from the branch office of Jehovah's Witnesses, the Australia branch, and we will discuss in detail who those people were. Also, a member of the governing body testified, and that is why, if you noticed on the earlier part, there was a series of consecutive dates that the hearing was scheduled, and then again on August 14th. August 14th was when they managed to get the governing body member, Jeffrey Jackson, in there to testify. Also, the Watchtower submitted their own, I'm doing air quotes here on the radio, expert to give her opinion on the Watchtower Society and Jehovah's Witnesses' responses to child sexual abuse. And then also they talked to a solicitor from the Queensland office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. I guess it'd be kind of like a district attorney in the United States. So they talked to all of those people. All of these videos have been posted to YouTube, but it's like 20-something hours worth of video to watch. And this document kind of summarizes what the Mr. Stewart, the senior counsel assisting the commission, feels was relevant from all of that testimony, as well as the written testimony. So it looked in detail at the BCB and BCG's experiences. It looked at what they testified as to what happened to them, and then talked to the elders that dealt with their case, and then some more upper management from the Australian branch of the Watchtower as to whether the procedures in place are in fact what the elders did. So it looked at the policies and whether they were followed, and if they were followed, the point of the commission is to figure out what went wrong and what they can do better. So, like point 7 here says, the case study also considered the role of Watchtower Australia and the governing body in the organization's response to allegations of abuse. So that's the setup for this document. And it begins by talking about, I think what's interesting about this is we are getting a really good view of how Jehovah's Witnesses and the organization looks to normal worldly people. I think when you're a witness, you are told what the world thinks of witnesses, and you're told what to think of the world, and you just accept that as granted, that that honest-hearted people in the world respect the witnesses and think that they're amazing, and evil people in the world are under Satan's influence and hate the witnesses. And those are basically the only types of worldly people there are to Jehovah's Witnesses. You're either honest-hearted ones and you're a potential sheep, and of course you think the witnesses are awesome, or you're under Satan and you hate the witnesses because you're an opposer. But the vast majority of worldly people are just normal people who don't fall into any sort of Watchtower category. People are people. They're just normal human beings. And Mr. Stewart and the people on his staff and the people who asked questions here at this hearing are just normal people. And so this document shows in a real tangible way what Jehovah's Witnesses look like to normal people. So it gives a little history of when the witnesses were founded, where they were founded. You can see on the screen in the 1800s by Charles Taze Russell. The whole point of their organization at the time was that Christ had returned, that Armageddon was coming in 1914, and of course none of that ever happened, so they've had to invent new light since then. Today, as it brings out, a little over 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses in the world, 239 countries, and there's a branch in Australia. Of course, witnesses are worldwide, and the Australia branch has been there since, like it says, 1904. Now, even though there's a branch office that's the legal entity in Australia, the Commission realizes that all Jehovah's Witnesses around the world answer to the governing body in Brooklyn. That's just how it is. The governing body oversees everything that all of the branches and all of the congregations worldwide do. And the governing body, as it says, is considered anointed. I think a lot of this background stuff are things that we already know, but I think it's important to rehash that this is kind of this may have been new to a lot of the people who are dealing with this in Australia from a secular nature. So it's important for the Commission to spell it all out so that people know, okay, this is who Jehovah's Witnesses are, this is what the Watchtower is, and this is, why they do what they do. And basically they do what they do because the governing body tells them to do what they do. Something you can see on the screen right now are the footnotes, the citations at the bottom of the page. This document is heavily cited. Not very few, none basically, of the assertions made are just pulled out of thin air. They're all based on evidence that was collected during these hearings, and each statement has its citation at the bottom of each page. These documents also, if you would like to look at them more later, you can get them from the Royal Commission site. There's also a Facebook discussion group on the Australian Royal Commission that has all the documentation in the files section. So it mentions in the section here on the governing body that they heard from Mr. Jackson, who is a governing body member since 2005, and that he was appointed because of quote-unquote spiritual qualifications, and that there are several committees that the governing body is broken into or overseeing, and there are 30 helpers, and Mr. Jackson serves on 3 of them, teaching, writing, and personnel. The way he explained the governing body as a spiritual group of men who are guardians of the doctrine, which is kind of interesting to me as somebody who was in the organization for around 40 years. I never heard that phrase, guardians of the doctrine. But hey, maybe he just coined it then at the spur of the moment. Maybe it's something they're using now. But anyway, the governing body are guardians of the doctrine. And I'm not sure which paragraph it's mentioned in here. He also mentioned that the Bible is their constitution. So, but what's interesting here in paragraph 14 is that Mr. Stewart asked if the governing body sees themselves as the modern day disciples of Jesus, and it says Mr. Jackson did not answer in the affirmative, but told the Royal Commission that members of the governing body, quote, hope to be Jesus' disciples. Also, similarly, and I'm just going to read this because Mr. Stewart phrases it better than I can anyway. When asked if the governing body members saw themselves as, quote, Jehovah God's spokespeople on earth, Mr. Jackson did not answer, instead telling the Royal Commission that, quote, it would seem to be quite presumptuous to say that we are the only spokesperson that God is using. Mr. Jackson's professed humility is not, however, supported by the Jehovah's Witness organization's own publications. So, yeah, he tried to put on a little show of humility and say that it would be presumptuous to claim that they're God's spokespeople. But in fact, that is what they claim, and they are presumptuous. Because, as is quoted throughout the rest of this paragraph, are several different Jehovah's Witness Watchtower documents where it says that you must trust the channel, which is the governing body. And I'm just going to, I guess, leave this on the screen for a few minutes so you can see the details yourselves. But it really, that was one of the most disingenuous moments of many other disingenuous moments of Mr. Jackson. I felt like he was intentionally sort of condescending and smarmy while he was testifying, whereas I thought, or I got the impression from several of the other elders and branch members that testified at the hearing, that they actually they kind of were humbled. Humbled by the situation, humbled by their knowledge that they really are ill-equipped to deal with serious matters such as child sexual abuse, humbled by the fact that they are speaking to a royal commission, and humbled because they belong to an organization where you're not really allowed to be prideful of anything anyway, unless, of course, you're on the governing body. So, yeah, Jackson really came across as thinking he was kind of all that, and his humility really did sort of ring hollow when he tried to sound like he was being humble. Because as this paragraph shows, And as we know, who know Jehovah's Witnesses, they are told to trust, to obey, to follow the governing body, and that the governing body is Jehovah God's only channel on earth to give leadership and information to human beings. So Jackson didn't outright deny that, but he implied that it would be presumptuous to think that. And indeed it is. He's one of the most presumptuous groups of people, 7 people on the planet. He did also, just for informational purposes, indicate that the governing body are all considered anointed and part of the 144,000 who expect to go to heaven when they die. As far as the structure of the organization goes, that I think was important for the commission to lay out as well, because the religion is hierarchically structured. It was established congregationally structured, where each congregation kind of did their own thing back 150 years ago. And the Charles Taze Russell did not believe in centralized power or a centralized organization. In fact, the early watchtowers said, there's a quote from the early watchtowers saying, organization is wholly unnecessary. However, when Russell passed away and J.F. Rutherford took over the organization, he basically changed everything. It's not at all the religion that it was. So it became, over time, through president of the Watchtower Society, Rutherford, through Knorr, to Franz, to the governing body taking over in the mid-70s, it became more and more hierarchical. And now it really is central power in the hands of the governing body. So that's basically the pattern. The governing body has branches who they oversee throughout the world, and then the branches deal with matters within their own geographic region. 90 some odd branches according to the document, and there's a committee in each branch. And this commission speaks to 3 elders from the Australian branch committee. It also lays out how there are, under the branches, there are circuits, and the circuits have a circuit overseer, and each circuit has approximately 20 congregations, and the CO visits them a couple of times a year. Things that Jehovah's Witnesses and former Jehovah's Witnesses are very familiar with. Whoops, scrolled too far. And then at the local level, there are congregations. And in the legal sense, it explains how each congregation is a voluntary association and separately registered as a charity. Charity so that it can be tax exempt as a religion. In the United States, things are a little bit different with how religions are registered and remain tax-free, tax-exempt. But in many other countries, you have to be registered as what they call a charity. And you have to demonstrate that you do some sort of charitable work. And for the witnesses, their quote-unquote charitable work is their free home Bible studies that they give to people. They don't basically really do any other sorts of charities like food banks or food drives or helping the homeless or anything like that. But anyway, that's an aside to the word charity. They're a legally registered charity, and each congregation is its own legally registered thing in the nation of Australia. Now, here's some interesting statistics about Australia. 821 congregations and around 68,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. Here's what's interesting. I wish this doesn't go on to 2 different pages, but I'm going to have to scroll down. But over the past 25 years, the growth of Jehovah's Witnesses has been 29%, from around 53,000 up to the 68,000. In the same period, Australia's population growth has been approximately 38%. So that means that Jehovah's Witnesses, as a percentage of the population in Australia, are not growing, they're shrinking, which is quite interesting to me. The population has grown 38%, and the amount of time that the number of witnesses has grown 29%. Okay, I probably should do the math on paper before I say they're not growing. Scratch what I just said. I might be wrong. Somebody do the math for me. At first glance, that looked like, oh, they're not growing as fast as the population. But the population's obviously much bigger, so 1% is a different... Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, maybe I'll do the math and bring it to another show and correct myself if I was wrong. Anyway, interesting numbers. The branch committee brings out as 12 elders. They have a legal department. They have a service department and a service desk. And that's significant mainly because the people we hear from are the head lawyer, the head of the service desk, and I think the head of the service department. And it brings out the service department and desk care for the aspects of the spiritual activities of the witnesses. It doesn't say what the legal department does. Oh no, the legal department deals with legal stuff. And I guess it's the branch, the chair of the branch committee, the service desk head, and the legal department are the three that we're going to hear from here in a few moments, which is right here. Mr. O'Brien, Terrence O'Brien, is the coordinator of the branch committee. Mr. Rodney Spinks is the service desk senior elder, and then Vincent Toole is the lawyer, the solicitor for the Watchtower. And it shows how long they've been serving there. I'll leave that on the screen for a moment. Now these three gentlemen were basically approached by the commission with questions about the procedure that the elders followed and whether those procedures are still the branch procedures and whether there were ever the branch procedures and what actually are the branch's procedures for dealing with child sexual abuse, because the branch is involved because elders are instructed to, whenever there's an allegation, before they do anything else, call the branch and find out what they're supposed to do. So that's why the branch is involved in this. And then, of course, it brings out that the legal corporation is Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Australia Limited. Now, I think we all know how the congregations are structured, so I may scroll past some of this fairly quickly. You know, there are elders, there are ministerial servants. There were questions about could women be elders? Could women participate in the process? And of course they don't, they can't, they're not allowed to. And it really looks like the organization's not going to budge on that in any way. So there are bodies of elders. They are recommended by basically themselves. The body recommends new members to the body to the circuit overseer, who will assign or approve new elders and ministerial servants. Line 32 here is significant because Mr. Jackson in his testimony confirmed that the belief of Jehovah's Witnesses is that elders and ministerial servants are appointed by the Holy Spirit. And if you were ever a witness, you know that that's the case. And that puts elders and servants in a position of authority, especially elders, a position of respect and a position of basically, they fit into the hierarchy as above a regular publisher. When you're a regular publisher, you look up to them and you follow what they recommend. And then there are regular publishers. Baptized publishers, unbaptized publishers. Publishers mean you go out in service and report time. The report here also talks about how the faithful and discreet slave is considered now to be the governing body. It was always considered to be anointed men, including the governing body. But the teachings are shown in the organization publications to be from Jehovah God, not from men. And so teachings in the magazines and in the books and from the platform are supposed to be considered from God. And so you don't question what the elders are telling you. Interesting subheading title here, Scriptural Literalism, and that is a good way to put it. Although the witnesses don't use that term that I recall, Jehovah's Witnesses do interpret the Bible literally, use the Bible liberally, and use it to support their beliefs. So if they want there to be no women involved in any sort of judgment or in any sort of being able to be involved in one of these cases of child sexual abuse, then they'll find a scripture to support that. Basically, it's what they do. And it is a way of life for all members, as it says here. And if you were ever a witness, you remember, you know how busy you are, and while you're busy at the meetings, they're telling you to be busier, to be out in service more. Are you doing all you can? I can't count the times I've heard that phrase. Are you doing all you can? With the implication that, no, you're probably not. You probably should be doing more. So, yeah, it's a way of life. And if you're not making it your way of life, you're going to be guilt-tripped into making it your way of life. And so, like it says here, members of the organization are taught to be obedient and submissive to those in the organization in positions of authority, including elders. Members of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization are expected to adhere to a strict code of moral conduct based on the scriptures and enforced by a highly formalized disciplinary process for dealing with wrongdoing. Which is the judicial committee process that much of these hearings focused on. It talks about how witnesses are separate from the world. We remember that. And this becomes important. Let's just read through it a little bit, and then we can talk about how it becomes important. It says, the Jehovah's Witness organization teaches that it was of great importance to Jesus that his followers keep separate from the world, and offers guidance as to how its members might themselves go about keeping separate from the world. The organization encourages its members to exercise caution when associating with those who are not members. Non-Jehovah's Witnesses are referred to within the organization as, quote, worldly people, and those who are, quote, not in the truth. Those are loaded language terms that Jehovah's Witnesses use, worldly, in the truth, not in the truth, that basically are designed with additional meaning and additional emotional impact. When you think about association with the world or with worldly people, you instantly think not us, not me, different, them. And the us-them mentality is fostered in a religion like the Jehovah's Witnesses. It talks about how, as part of that separateness from the world, is a sort of distrust in education, a lack of higher education, frowning upon sexual education in schools, and there's plenty of documentation that they had in evidence to show these things, that that education is frowned upon at the higher levels. Jehovah's Witnesses do try to obey the laws and the secular authorities. However, they also always emphasize in the Jehovah's Witness publications, Acts 5:29, we must obey God as ruler rather than men. And we've already heard in this document and in the documentation from the Watchtower Society and the testimony from Watchtower executives that witnesses are instructed to treat the words of the governing body, the words in the Watchtower magazines and publications and from the platform at assemblies and meetings, as not from men, but from God. And so when this scripture is applied, we must obey God as ruler rather than men. All of those other things come into play. The Bible, the Watchtower, the talks. All of that comes before secular government. So while they say that, yes, we obey the secular laws, really it's very, very secondary to what's coming from the Watchtower organization. So Jehovah's Witnesses, Spinks actually said this, Mr. Spinks in his testimony, Jehovah's Witnesses will always obey Scripture where there is a clear Bible principle that conflicts with secular law. And that's usually pretty much true. And it goes on to explain here how there's this sort of antipathy for secular governments that is built by the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. The scripture, Ephesians 6:12, we have a struggle not against blood and flesh, but against the governments, against the authorities, against the world rulers of this darkness, against the wicked spirit forces in heavenly places. Now, this scripture is applied by witnesses as we are opposed to and opposed by worldly governments and worldly people. And so attacks from the spirit realm, according to this Keep Yourselves in God's Love book, are highly organized and deliberate, meaning that Satan and the demons control the governments, according to Jehovah's Witnesses. And so there's a natural antipathy and enmity and distrust of the governments. So even though, yes, Jehovah's Witnesses obey the traffic laws and pay their taxes, rendering Caesar's things to Caesar, they still view the world as Satan's world and their enemy. And that is the point that's being made here. So, in light of such doctrinal teachings, this document says, it's submitted that the message published to members of the Jehovah's Witness organization about their relationship with secular authorities is not as simple as that described by Mr. Toole and Spinks. It's submitted that, in fact, the organization presents its members with conflicting and ambiguous teachings regarding their relationship with secular authorities, thereby fostering a distrust of such authorities. Nailed it. That's it. Witnesses are taught to distrust the governments and the secular authorities because they're from, quote, Satan's world, but they're told at the same time, obey the laws, pay your taxes, render Caesar's things to Caesar. And so it's that sort of ambiguity and confusion leaves you reliant upon the organization to make those sorts of decisions for you. And so when the elders are told, before you decide to report a matter of crime to the police, call the branch office first, they're like, oh yeah, I don't know what I should do. Should I call the police? Should not? No. They don't even think what they should do because they'll just call the branch and the branch will tell them what to do. It goes on to talk about how the witnesses, in addition to distrusting the world, believe that we are in the time of the end of the system of things, and that they're looking forward to the time when God will, quote, cut off the wicked. Basically, they're looking forward to the time when God will come and kill all but 8 million people on this planet. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses look forward to. However, it brings out that they were wrong about 1914, 1918, 1925, 1975. Basically, they've not been correct yet, but they keep plugging along. And they believe that Armageddon is imminent. So, you know, you're bird food, and if you have a nice house, they're looking forward to moving into it after Jehovah kills you. So, sorry, I got a little snarky there. Also, it talks about their preaching. Jehovah's Witnesses go door to door trying to recruit new members. They put their obligations to preach, as it says, above secular employment. They often encourage, or if not encourage outright, they often give praise to brothers and sisters who have, say, quit their jobs or downsized their business or something to that effect so that they can pioneer and be out in service more. And so they have their they really push the preaching work as the primary important, really good thing that witnesses can do. And then it talks about the meetings and how the meetings work. They have a regular watchtower for the watchtower study, and then they have one for the public that doesn't show all the crazy cult stuff in it. Male headship. Obviously, this is a huge issue in these cases, and it's becoming clear as time goes on tonight that I'm not even going to come close to covering this entire document in one cult-free radio show, but I will. I'll continue plugging away at it until we've talked about the entire thing. But I think this is a key issue when it comes to children, young men, young women, grown people, men and women, who are reporting sexual abuse that happened to them when they were children, to 3 elders who have to be men without any women present. That's a big, big problem for the organization. And it's one of the things that the commission kept trying to sort of get through to these elders, that can't you see how having a 17-year-old girl tell 3 elders plus the man who raped her about what happened is not right? It's not cool. It's not kind. It's not loving. It's not Christian. It's stupid. It's just bad policy, and it's because of the male headship misogyny of the Watchtower and Jehovah's Witness organization. Now, this paragraph brings out that documents and evidence show that Jehovah's Witness organization teaches that being in subjection to God is essential, and that it's important to observe the headship principle. Mr. O'Brien explained that the headship principle accepted by Jehovah's Witnesses is that the head of every man is the Christ, in turn the head of a woman is the man. Mr. O'Brien's evidence revealed that this belief is reflected in the patriarchal structure of the organization, where men hold positions of authority within congregations and headship in the family. Women are expected to defer to the authority of their husbands, and children are taught to obey their parents. Now might be a good time for me to explain why it was so frustrating for me to read the Watchtower's submission to the commission, because all of the stuff that I've talked about so far and all the stuff that I'm going to talk about is also talked about from the Watchtower's sort of illogical, twisted perspective that's just really hard to get your mind wrapped around once you've broken free from that cult way of thinking. And it's incredibly frustrating, I think, as somebody who's recovering from being in that organization, to go back to reading that type of language. It's just really different. Anyway, bottom of the page right now, we're looking at available findings on the Jehovah's Witness relationship with secular authorities. After every section of this document, there's a list of what are termed findings, and they're labeled F and a number, F1 finding 1, F2 finding number 2. And so we're at the end of a section here where we have, this is F1, the first kind of summary finding about Jehovah's Witnesses, and here's what is submitted to the commission as a finding. The Jehovah's Witness organization presents its members with conflicting and ambiguous teachings regarding their relationship with secular authorities, thereby fostering a distrust of such authorities. Yeah, pretty much it. You know, I could probably just go through and read this, and this document kind of, it nails all the problems relating to this subject with the Watchtower Society. But then coming up in this next section, it talks about the data. And if you haven't heard about these hearings, some of these numbers might just blow you away, because the Royal Commission put out a call for documentation and asked the Watchtower to provide its documentation about allegations or complaints of child sexual abuse. And here in paragraph 52, it explains how Watchtower Australia produced some 5,000 documents comprising, among other things, files relating to some 1,000 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse dating back to 1950. The Royal Commission staff analyzed the files and produced even more detailed data, which we're going to look at right now. Since 1950, the Watchtower of Australia itself has recorded allegations, reports, or complaints of child sexual abuse against 1,006 members of Jehovah's Witness organization in Australia. That's 1,006 people were accused of child sexual abuse in Watchtower Australia. Now, if you remember the numbers now, and in 1990 there were 53,000 witnesses. So from 1950 to now, 1,006 perpetrators. And the next paragraph brings out 1,800 victims of child sexual abuse. And the files record that 579 of those who were accused confessed, and 108 of them were elders or ministerial servants at the time it happened. 108 elders or ministerial servants were accused of child sexual abuse. Now, as the paragraph brings out, the files don't reveal how many perpetrators were elders or servants at the time of subsequent instances. But it does say that 28 alleged perpetrators were appointed after having been the subject of an allegation of child sexual abuse. So a man is accused of child sexual abuse, evidently not, the accusation's not believed, or it's maybe found to be unfounded by the elders for some reason, and then at some point this guy's made a servant or an elder. You're going to find in a few moments here that that's even more disgusting than you think. It also brings out that 401 alleged perpetrators were disfellowshipped in relation to the allegation of child sexual abuse. So 1,006, I think it was, up above, were accused, 401 disfellowshipped. 230 of those alleged perpetrators were reinstated. And of those disfellowshipped, 78 were disfellowshipped on more than one occasion, multiple times, because of child sexual abuse. So you've got people being disfellowshipped for raping kids, being reinstated. You've got people being accused of raping kids, then later being appointed as elders. You've just got problems here obviously, in how you're dealing with people who molest children. Now, Mr. Spinks said he didn't want to try to diminish the significance of the number of alleged perpetrators, but then he went on to try and diminish the significance by saying 199 of the 1,006 perpetrators were not witnesses at the time of the first reported allegation, which I guess the point is that those almost 200 people, quote unquote, came into the truth after being child rapists. Okay, I guess in their world, that makes them better people. They're still predators. Sorry. Witnesses are wrong. Many times, many cases, he admitted that they went on to be subjects of child sexual abuse while they were witnesses as well. Now, the solicitor, the lawyer, Mr. Toole, he testified that he gets phone calls from the elders about allegations, and he gets 3 or 4 per month about this topic. That's how prevalent it is in these congregations. What were there, 800-something congregations? And he gets 3 or 4 calls per month about child sexual abuse. And he said this is a consistent number with what you're getting. Now, here's what makes it worse. The analysis conducted by Royal Commission staff showed that the 1,006 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse identified by the Jehovah's Witness organization in Australia, not one was reported to police or other secular authority by the Jehovah's Witness organization, including by elders within the organization. Let that sink in. And then tell me that it's up to them to decide whether to report or not. It's clearly a systemic problem when there are 1,006 perpetrators and not one was reported by the Watchtower Society, by a congregation, or by elders in a congregation. Now, that's not to say none are ever reported by anybody ever as Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, clearly sometimes the victim will report or the victim's family will report. So occasionally, there are witnesses that do get brought to justice. However, it's not a formal process that gets reported by elders or by the organization. So many, many times it's not reported. Like line 62 here says, it was put to Mr. Toole that there's no record in the case files of an elder having ever reported an allegation of child sexual abuse to the police or secular authorities. Mr. Toole accepted that, if that's the way the files read, I assume that must be correct. The analysis demonstrated that 161 of the alleged perpetrators recorded in the files had nevertheless been convicted of child sexual abuse offense, indicating that in spite of not having been reported by the organization, the alleged perpetrator had still come to the attention of police. Well, thank goodness for that somebody has reported some of these. But even that's a small number. How much was that? Let me scroll back up again. 160, was it? $161 out of 1,006. Now, the Watchtower Society, they did a search of their files to try and, make themselves look better. And they claimed that they searched keywords such as police, child services, authorities, charge, court, welfare, and they found they contend that 383 alleged perpetrators had been dealt with by police or secular authorities in states or territories in which they reside. And so they gave evidence of, well, hey, there were some hits when we searched for police or court or welfare. The search methodology, though, could have yielded results when the instruction was said, do not call the police. If you just search police and then count hits on police, you don't know whether they called the police, didn't call the police, or what the sentence said. So the search methodology was not supported, and therefore the commission comes up with these findings, finding 2 and 3, which summarize the state of affairs. Since 1950, the Jehovah's Witness organization in Australia has received allegations of child sexual abuse against 1,006 of its members, relating to at least 1,800 victims, and has in that period not reported a single allegation to the police or other authorities, even though 579 of those against whom the allegations were made confessed to having committed child sexual abuse. Finding 3, the Jehovah's Witness organization in Australia receives approximately 3 to 4 reports of allegations of child sexual abuse each month. Now, what I am going to do is call it a night. It's my birthday. So I am going to call it a night for Cult Free Radio. I am going to continue to analyze this document and discuss it. I may do a live show later again in the month, or I may just record it and post it. So look for announcements on Facebook, on the Cult Free Radio page, on the YouTube channel, and also perhaps even in several other news groups on Facebook and on jehovahswitness.com, the discussion board. I'll keep you all posted as we continue on through our summary of the submissions of the Senior Council assisting the Royal Commission. I want to thank everybody for listening this evening, and I want to really thank the Australian Royal Commission, Chief Justice McClellan, Senior Counsel assisting the Commission, Mr. Angus Stewart, the entire staff that we know, if we've watched the hearings, worked really hard to get to the truth, and who really showed a love for people and protecting children from dangerous, harmful policies like that of the Watchtower Society and Jehovah's Witnesses. So thanks to the Commission. It does get even more interesting, so stay tuned for future Cult Free Radios, and have a great night, everybody.